Emma.
Hi, Sam. We're back
It's
at
so
Birth the Middle Way.
we are, and it feels so good. I'm super excited for today's conversation with you.
I know, I feel like it's been so long. I missed you.
I know, seriously. We had a little lag there for a week or so with no recording, so it feels
Yeah,
super good to be back in the flow.
yeah, it feels really good. So today we're going to be talking about informed consent. I'm going to be sharing a bit about my story, and talking about the history of obstetrics as well as informed consent woven within that history, and specifically speaking on a woman named Anarcha Westcott. I did a personal podcast that I'll link below as well if you want to hear more about her story, and how it relates to mine. But you'll be learning a bit about her as well here today.
Exactly, yeah, and we were really just excited to bring forth this thread of conversation and explore it together, and specifically weaving your experience and your story and your process into the conversation, Emma, because, something I observe you embodying in a really beautiful way is your curiosity and your claiming of a truly deep, informed consent. And so, yeah, I would just love to stand next to you as you share your process because I feel like people can really learn something from just actually listening to the way you're processing what you're processing and how you are, yeah, activating informed consent through the process of curiosity and question asking. And I pray that people walk away from this episode and from this conversation today feeling more able to embody what you're embodying in the wake of interfacing and relating with care practitioners across the board, whether that be, in the system, out of the system, regardless. Just really sharing that you can always ask questions. You can always seek to understand anything and everything in detail when it comes to your body and your life and your care.
And your children?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess I'll start with waking up from a coma, after birthing my son and knowing that he passed away. Um, a couple days in the ICU. I was then transferred back to the hospital in the town that I live. And I was told that I would never be able to birth vaginally again. And that was a huge thing to receive and have to process after learning that my son died. I didn't even know if I had my uterus because I had to consent to having a potential hysterectomy in the event that I would have hemorrhaged because the hospital didn't have a lot of blood supply if I did hemorrhage and they needed to give me a transfusion. And so, anyways, I'm awake from a coma after a couple of days because I had sepsis, my organs had shut down, I was intubated. And then I'm being told that I'll never be able to birth vaginally again because of the type of tear and the location of the tear that I had during labor, that I had, I guess, received during labor. And the location of the tear was, and you're going to have to, Sam, help me with the specific terminology. Anterior means the back, correct?
Anterior means the front.
Means the front. So
Yeah.
posterior. So I have a
Facing the
posterior,
front of your body. Yeah.
right. Okay. So I have a posterior tear up close to my cervix, in my vaginal canal, or I had, anyways. It's been repaired since. Um, and the doctors, so that tear didn't get repaired for a while. They tried to repair it, and there were some complications, and so I had to go in for subsequent surgeries, following that. And because of the location of the tear, many doctors said, I will never be able to birth vaginally again. And that was a very gut wrenching thing to receive information of, hey, your body can't birth a baby. It is not possible or safe for you to birth a baby again. And I was told this many, many, many times. And first, I had to digest that information and say, okay, can I surrender to that potential outcome of me not actually being able to birth this baby, like any future babies that I may have? And at the same time, trying to come to terms with my only child right now is dead. And how do I hold all of that? And then having to navigate, you're going to have more surgeries to repair the damage that your body had. And I just had tubes in my body, and there was just a lot going on. And following that initial conversation, I met with doctors for months and months, all throughout that first postpartum year. Constantly receiving that information. You'll never be able to birth vaginally. You'll never be able to birth vaginally. You're likely going to tear. And as I began to integrate those pieces more and more throughout that year, I I started to ask a lot of questions because there have been historically many women told that same story. You had a cesarean, it's not safe for you to birth vaginally. You can't birth vaginally for this reason or this reason or this reason. It's not safe. Women are told this all the time, right? And so my question was why? And I sat with doctors and I guess my mentality going into these conversations was A, curiosity, and B, looking at it as though it's a math problem. And I remember thinking in these conversations and using the example of a math class and thinking of what it was like for me to be in school in a math class. And I remembered my teacher saying, show me your work. You can give me an answer, but until you show me how you got to that answer, I can't give you a passing grade. And so with these doctors, I've asked them, what makes you say, like, why are you saying this? What makes you say I can't birth vaginally? Because women tear all the time. Is it the location? What is it? Like, I would like to know what's going on with my body, and not from a place of being on the defense or trying to prove them wrong or trying to eventually have a vaginal birth, like really no attachment to an outcome, purely from the sake of being curious about, this is my body. You're saying my body can't do something or it shouldn't do something that can be spontaneous. I want to know what's going on with my body, and I want to know how you
Right.
got there.
Right. And it's not even about a lack of trust, to highlight that
Hmm.
piece. It's like you can have trust in your caregiver, but you don't have to have blind trust in your caregiver. You don't have to receive something like, okay, I had one cesarean section, and how many doctors will just say from that alone, you will never birth vaginally, and say it like quite cold and dry like that. You will never birth vaginally. And to not feel as though we have the spaciousness or the capacity or the ability to say, but why? Explain this to me in depth without that equating to, I don't trust you as my care provider. That, like that specific thread, I just want to highlight. Like, we need to be co creating an environment within the spectrum of all care to normalize asking questions and being curious about the information we're being given.
And
Because, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I would argue that by me asking these questions to doctors and having these conversations, the only reason I'm even able to do that is because there is trust there. Because I
Right.
trust that by asking these questions, they're going to be giving me accurate information. They're going to educate me. They're going to show me diagrams and point to different things, teach me about the statistics or their experiences of what they've seen, what they know, and what they don't know.
Exactly. Right. And that's beautiful with your care providers, but I know multiple stories of people questioning their care providers and
Hmm.
being shamed.
Hmm.
I'm your doctor. This type of semantic being projected
Hmm.
at people. So I celebrate so much that that's your experience, and also just want to kind of speak that layer, that thread into the space, because there are a lot of care providers out there with authority complexes, and
Yeah.
they kind of move and behave in this way that it's like, well, because I studied for this long and I wear this white coat, you need to do what I say, basically.
I'm the authority.
Exactly.
And before we got onto this call, before we hit record, we had this conversation of um, when you're entering a birth space, when you're planning your birth and what that's going to look like and what you're going to include, what you're not going to include, when you're speaking with your care providers, it's not to say that the care provider has more authority than you. You're working together. It's a symbiotic process. And of course, a surgeon would have authority to make surgical decisions. I'm not going to make those decisions because I don't have that training. That doesn't make sense. My doula isn't going to be making decisions for my surgical care because they're not a surgeon. They don't know that, but we can work together and build trust and build that rapport. And so this has been something that I've been mulling over for months. I mean, since I've received this information of you can never birth vaginally again. And again, I'm not saying that I'm curious because I want to change my future outcomes of anything. I'm not trying to convince a doctor to let me have a vaginal birth. I'm not trying to, have biased information so I can go and birth my child out in the woods in a way that might be unsafe for my future child or me. What I am saying is I am curious. I want to know what's going on in my body. And so when I approached several doctors with this information of when you're saying I can't birth vaginally, can you show me why you're saying that? Can you show me your work? Just like in math class, how did you get to this conclusion? What are the statistics of something being unsafe for me or for baby? And they said, there's no statistics because this kind of tear is super rare. And so my question was, if it's rare and you don't have statistics, what makes you so certain that I will not be able to birth vaginally? What makes you so resolute in this conclusion if you don't have statistics, if you haven't seen this many times, if at all, before? And that kind of brought this like openness from them. They were like, well, this is just what we're taught. This is what we know. And so the follow-up question was, can you explain this? Explain your rationale, explain your thinking. And the only information I got was basically their idea is that if baby is coming down, you're fully dilated, baby's coming down, and there's a lot of pressure on that scar site, the likelihood of tearing is higher. And that location of repair is a tricky location. And that could make the healing a lot more difficult the way it was this past year. And you don't want to go through that again. That's a lot for your body. And it's a lot for your body to then heal scar tissue right next to other scar tissue. But my question to follow up that was, okay, so you're saying if there's prolonged pressure on a scar site and that increases the likelihood of tearing, what would happen if the birth was quick? Because my concern now is if I am camping and I'm 37 weeks pregnant and I'm not thinking I'm going to go into labor and I go into spontaneous labor and I'm far away from medical care and I end up birthing this vaginal baby, am I going to die? Is my baby going to die? How unsafe are we talking? Because this is a spontaneous, potentially spontaneous experience that the female body can go through. How much concern and stress do I need to put on getting to a hospital if baby comes in 20 minutes, which does happen, especially for second, third, fourth children down the line? How unsafe are we talking? And then I was met with, well, if baby comes really fast, the likelihood of tearing is lower because you're not having prolonged pressure on that scar site. And so this all of a sudden opened up, at least in me, opened up that doorway just a little bit of spaciousness when the door was closed, locked, nailed shut, boarded up, bricked over, right? Because that's the way the doctors were describing it. That's the way they still are describing it. You'll never be able to birth vaginally. That is not happening. And in trying to educate myself and trying to understand their perspective, because it's not just, how did you get there? Why are you saying that? I'm going to do this my own way and getting defensive. No, I just want to understand where you're coming from. I want to learn about my body from your perspective, from your educational background, and being very aware that any future children I have, I'm going to have doulas and midwives. I'm going to have Sam on the phone for every appointment that I have because I want different opinions. What one doctor says isn't law, right? Doctors aren't God. They're not miracle workers. They do good things. They do. And they can cause harm,
And exactly. And they
you
can get
know,
things wrong. They're
and they can get
human.
things wrong.
And like, let's be real, like in terms of studying the human body, 8 years is not that long of a time. You
Mm-mm.
don't know everything
No,
about the human body in 8 years. You just don't. You don't know everything about birth in 8 years,
no.
And so can we just
Mm-mm.
hold these realities, these truths with a little bit of grace, with a
Mm-hmm.
little bit of humility, really
Yeah.
facing the reality of what is, like to go down the path of being a doctor, let's say, a midwife. My belief, bias, is that that is a lifelong educational path. There is no ending. There is no point where you get to where you're like, I know everything now. It's not possible. I think I could study birth. I mean, I started 9, 10 years ago. I think I could study it until I'm on my deathbed, at 90, let's say, and still not know everything about birth because it is as diverse. The spectrum is as wide as every woman that exists on this planet. And the little, unique qualities that her body carries, the little variations in the shape of her pelvis, the psychological imprints that she carries. Was she born vaginally? Was she born via cesarean? What was encoded and imprinted into her body? Like, it's just, the spectrum is too large. And so, curiosity and questioning across the board is healthy and productive, not only for the person receiving the care, but if we can be humble enough as care providers to use the questions presented to us from the people we're providing care for, if we can be humble enough in the wake of those questions to say, you know what, I don't know, but I'm going to find out. You just opened the possibility for yourself as a practitioner to learn and grow. What a beautiful thing.
Yeah. And that's something that my general practitioner, he is a godsend. I've been in hospital a lot throughout this past year, and he'll just like come in and say, "Hey, I heard you were in hospital. Just wanted to see how you're doing. Can I get you a coffee or a tea?" I'm like, I'm okay, thanks. Like he's so lovely. But I spoke to him not too long ago and I was talking about, is it safe for me to potentially get pregnant? Not that I am, but I am being sexually active right now. And so that means there's a chance, right? And
Right.
and I was speaking to him and he said, "Yeah, I think it would be safe." And I said, "Okay, well, I've got scars on my belly and scars in my vaginal canal. You know, what do you think about that?" And I was just asking him some questions, and he said, "When you're pregnant, you're you're producing a hormone. I think it's the HGC hormone, HCG hormone, whichever one,
HCG. Yeah.
HCG, that softens the tissues, the muscles, the skin, and it creates more elasticity and it creates more flexibility in the hips and all of these things." And he said that there probably wouldn't be an issue with the scars that I do have and my skin stretching because of that hormone, because of what women's bodies do. right? The hormones that we produce that allow for that stretching to be fecund with our children and then to be able to birth our children. And following that, I asked him a bunch of other questions, and he said, "You know what? I don't know." And I always leave these conversations and these appointments with you with more questions than I have answers. And so our next appointment, I will make sure to come back with some some more information if I'm able to track it down. And I cried in his office because I was met with humility and grace from a doctor who wants the best for me and my family, but is also willing to educate himself and step into that I don't know. And I had a conversation with another sister the other day, and this concept of the sacred I don't know came up. And can this I don't know be a prayer as well? Can we really stand in I don't know, and that's okay? And recognize that not every professional is going to know everything in their field anyways, and that's okay,
No,
right?
it's actually positive. It's
Yeah.
actually a good thing. And if you're in a space of reflection in general in your life, and you're really, in a mindset that orients towards contemplation,
Hmm.
when you hear the words, I don't know, but I'm going to find out from a care provider, what that ideally can elicit is a sense of safety. Because what you know in the wake of that response is that this person is standing in integrity. Because the person is willing to say, I don't know, when I don't know is the truth. And that's human. There's forever going to be things that we don't know,
Hmm.
even if we are a professional in a certain category. To put the expectations on ourselves or others that because you call yourself a professional in a certain category, that has to equate to everything about that category,
Hmm.
it's really unrealistic. It's
Yeah.
really unobtainable in my eyes.
Hmm.
And so then we lose productivity in the type of care because we're pushing people towards needing to embody or act as though they know everything and they're the savior. They're the one that
Hmm.
will, make sure everything's okay and take care of you. And it's I don't know, it's fluffed up in a way that's just not rooted in reality.
Yeah.
And so I think it actually then perpetuates these also harmful stories around people in the system, because we're moving in this way that we expect our care providers to know everything, right? And then when they don't, the pendulum swings to the other extreme of, well, we can't trust the system.
Hmm.
As a birth worker in alternative kind of spaces, something I come up against a lot is medical trauma, is women who want nothing to do with birthing in the system. In fact, I've even had a mother be willing to consciously birth at home and potentially have a baby who does not survive solely because of her level of medical trauma. She was on her knees crying to me, like, I can't, I will not birth this baby in the hospital, regardless of the circumstances. I cannot and I will not. Like, that is a very extreme thing to express,
And a very
right?
real thing too,
And a very real thing.
and a very
And
valid
so,
thing.
right. And sure, we could go to all of the layers of judgment of like, what, you're that selfish that you're not going to prioritize the life of your child? Well, no, it's not just that black and white and that simple. Because
Hmm.
trauma, somebody else's trauma, you can't relate to. So you're projecting onto that person's experience and trauma of, you're a bad person because you're not going to do everything in your power to save your baby's life, but you have no ability to stand in that woman's shoes and actually understand the ways in which her trauma is debilitating her, is causing
Hmm.
her to completely freeze, causing her to literally feel as though the easier option is for her baby to die. than to step into a hospital.
Well, and if there's medical trauma there as well, I would go so far as to say, isn't there a primal protective nature coming forward saying, I would rather my child die than suffer at the hands of the medical system the way I did, right? Is
Right.
that not a
Exactly.
piece of it that is so important? And so, of course,
Exactly.
she is coming from a place of protection. And I'm reading a few
Really.
different studies right now, actually, that were offered to me. So I'm going to be speaking from a place of ignorance about these studies, but they're talking about the percentage of women in choosing their birth plan that are choosing from a place of what they feel is safest based on their understanding of safety. Do you
Exactly.
know the percent of women that are choosing that?
100.
100 fucking percent of women are always choosing what is safest. There is not a
Yeah.
pregnant woman out there, not one, that is choosing what she feels is the least safe option for her baby and for her. Not one. Does not exist.
Well,
Doesn't
because
exist.
to come back to this story, right? So what's happening in this mother's consciousness in that moment was, okay, so I'm being told that maybe my baby is not going to be viable. So now I'm choosing between giving birth, having people with gloved hands all up in my grill, telling me how long I get to hold my baby for before they take my baby away from me,
Mm,
before they do X, Y, and Z, and my baby gets pumped through the system, versus I give birth at home. I'm in a candlelit room. Nobody touches me. Nobody touches my baby. I put on music. I sit there for as long as I want. I hold my baby. I pray. I cry. I grieve. And I get to choose what the next steps are and when they happen. Right. And so I can have a lot of understanding for that, like for me, if it was guaranteed that my baby, if I like went and had an ultrasound, let's say at 37 weeks, and I found out my baby had passed, I would absolutely personally choose to birth at home.
right.
And yes, I understand that there are certain risks involved in birthing a baby who's passed.
Well, okay,
And
and
for
pause before we actually go on with that. I don't know if that statement can be completely true because we're not in those circumstances,
right,
right?
right,
This is what you're saying you would choose in this moment as Sam, who is not currently pregnant at 37 weeks, knowing that her baby had passed away. What would you decide? Where would you be in life? Like, I think there needs to be allowance for that nuance as well of
of
thinking
course,
about it
of course.
rationally now. That's what you would decide. However, being in that situation with all the subtleties and the complexities and the nuances of what your life might look like then would
Or what the
maybe
actual
elicit something
situation.
different. Exactly. Like it might elicit a different response.
And like if there was other medical information where like
Hmm.
like there's a higher risk for my life, and there
Yeah.
are certain situations that can increase risk, but in general, just like, just birthing a baby
Yeah.
that's passed, that can happen vaginally and at
Hmm.
home safely. And from the
Hmm.
ceremonial point, like there would have to be some very specific information in the field for me to not choose to birth at home, because
Hmm.
for me, I would want that ceremony and that
Yeah.
space and that bubble to be really tenderly held in a way that just it actually can't be held that way in Canada and the US at least.
Hmm.
Like I've been really looking into all of these birth suites throughout Europe. Like there's amazing birth suites in
Hmm.
Italy, in France, in Denmark. Like
Yeah.
you go into a hospital and like the suite is like out of this world.
Hmm.
Birth pools, couches, beds, like drawers, like a house filled with diapers and all of the things you need for baby. And like that is there's these projector screens in Denmark along a whole wall, and the mom gets to choose like what she watches and bursts to. Like so it's like whales with whale sounds, or like a sunset with music, like the
Beautiful.
craziest, most amazing things. And this is in a hospital setting, right? And so, when I'm speaking about the hospital and the system, I'm
Hmm.
Canadian. And so I'm very much, and I've spent a lot of years in the States. So I'm very much so referring to what's currently happening in
Right.
Canada and the US, but
Hmm.
I do know that Western countries around the world have beautiful advancements in
Mhm.
the realm of birth that really, really serve women and families and kind of in ways start to bring the home into the hospital,
Yeah.
which I think is
Yeah.
just such a beautiful thing.
Yeah. And I think that's really important because that does elicit and bring forward this parasympathetic nervous system response, which is important when you're birthing, right? You can't just be in a sympathetic, activated state all the time because you're not going
I think
to.
you have that mixed up. Parasympathetic is fight or flight. Sympathetic is when it comes back down.
Is it?
I can double
Okay.
check, but
Well, whichever
I'm
one's
close,
reversed. You
to
want to
positive.
be, yeah, you want to be in the rest and digest. Anyways, you want to be in a place where you're not activated and not heightened, um, and that you're able to breathe deeper and you're able to, surrender into all of what birth is opening up for you. Did you find out the?
You're right. You were right the first time. I swear I just Googled this last week because I had thought that, but yeah, anyway, you're right.
No, I think of parasympathetic in prana and life force and breathing, and that's my association in my head. And I'm like, oh no, I got it wrong.
That's great. I live for associations. I live for associations. That's
Yeah,
so
yeah,
great.
yeah.
I'll remember
I was like, I
forever
need a
now.
new association now.
The other association I can share for anterior posterior,
Yeah,
post is back, right? So postpartum is
yeah,
after birth. So
right,
it's something that comes behind.
right. And now I'm
So
thinking
post
anterior.
is backward.
Ants are born before I'm born, and so it's in front. It's weird associations that
Aha!
already. It makes sense to me. I'm like, oh, I'll remember that though. Like all of my aunts were born before me, and so they're in front of me.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. We'll take that. You're welcome, everybody. You'll never
Yes, here you
forget.
go. Yeah.
That's
Oh my
funny.
God. Yeah, word associations, man. But it is interesting just coming back to this point of doctors knowing everything. I've been on Instagram and I've seen several videos now over the last year where a woman, will have an emergency surgery on her face and then she's told, you're never going to be able to smile again because your muscles have atrophied and whatever's going on, or you'll never be able to walk again. And then they use exercises and they practice and they believe and they trust, and not from a place of like blissful ignorance or like, hey, I'm going to be able to do this, but grounded practices to show up to these hopes and these visions. And then they're able to walk again, they're able to smile again. I spoke to a pelvic floor specialist and I'm like, hey, will I be able to strengthen my pelvic floor with doing these exercises regularly? She was like, absolutely. Women heal from uterine prolapse, vaginal prolapse, like all these different things that can come about after childbirth or after pregnancy within the pelvic floor area. Like we can heal, we can do amazing things. Our bodies are brilliant in their ability to come back from difficult things, from painful things, from traumatic things. And so my question here is there a reality? And again, not from a place of ungrounded, flighty beliefs that aren't founded in actual practice and actual scientific results, but like, can I do anything to help my body heal, which would make birthing vaginally safe for me and baby?
Right.
And
Right.
so far, the doctors have said no. But again, I mean, I'm not done with this conversation because it doesn't make
Right.
sense to me, right? I want to
Right.
understand in a way that makes some logical, concrete, like linear, like I want there to be some sense here because for right
Right.
now, it just doesn't actually make sense. There's women with tears all over the place and they birth. And if you're saying that I would be able to birth likely if baby came really quick, why not set up a space where um, I spontaneously go into labor, I'm not induced, and I go into the hospital and there is support. And if it gets to a certain point that it's unsafe, then we can do a cesarean, but why not try? And again, I'm not coming from a place of I have an angle to have a vaginal birth. I'm coming from a place with a pure, authentic curiosity and a desire to understand
Right.
and to learn.
Right. Right. Yeah, you had a little word slip up there in terms of not getting induced. It would be not planning a C-section, right? That would be the
Right.
orientation, would be actually like rather than allowing spontaneous labor to open, there would be just a planned C-section at a certain
Right.
gestational
Well,
state.
I mean,
Were they
but with
talking about inducing you at some point?
no, but I'm thinking if I wanted to explore vaginal birth, I would say, do not induce me. Do not put Pitocin in my body. Do not do any of that. I'm wanting to wait until I spontaneously go into labor because if they were saying, okay, yeah, we could plan this when the doctors are, working together present
Right,
at the same time,
right.
then we could try if we induce you and we're working within this schedule parameter.
Right. And so then, like the next question to them would be, well, is it true that Pitocin creates irregular and unnatural contractions that can oftentimes be more intense for the
Ooh,
uterus? And thus, would the act of induction actually potentially increase the process of tearing? And
right.
so, really like advocating for like, okay, I understand if we induce, there could be a planned medical team there
Hmm.
to support the birth.
Yeah.
However, would there be more risk with that path? And would there be less risk if we maybe had more staff involved and in on the plan so that
Hmm.
everyone can be prepared so that whoever is on shift is aware of your case?
Hmm.
And thus there's more spaciousness to allow for spontaneous onset of labor.
Yeah. And to credit doctors as well, I mean, they're speaking from a place in terms of tearing from from a surgical tear. So they like, I mean, actually, hold on, let me just replace these words. They gave me an episiotomy, and so the tearing down during in my perineum was not a what would the word be? It would not be a physiological tear.
Right.
The tear in my vaginal canal was a physiological tear.
Uh-huh.
Doctors, from what I understand, know more about surgical tearing and less about physiological tearing. They chose to give me an episiotomy. I don't remember consenting to that. I might have. I was in a state of delirium, like I was dying, so I don't actually remember. But they gave me episiotomy because they didn't want me to tear more than needed. And they felt more
Right.
comfortable cutting me instead of just letting my body tear if it were to happen on its own. And that's not a unique circumstance. That happens quite often.
No, so I can actually explain that.
Yeah,
So
I
the
would love
reason
that.
why that's easier. So a surgical tear, let's imagine we have a blank sheet of printer paper,
Hmm.
okay? So a surgical tear, you're going to come in with a pair of scissors and cut a straight line
Hmm.
up through that paper. A physiological tear is going to be like taking the two edges of that paper and ripping.
Hmm.
And the tear is going to be like this, right? It's
Right.
not going to be a straight perfect line.
Hmm.
And so when you are going in to stitch that tissue, very different things are happening
Hmm.
with a surgical tear and a physiological tear. With the surgical tear, you can basically just sew that like you were sewing, a pair of jeans that like had a really straight cut, right? And it's just
Hmm.
about bringing the edges together and connecting those two straight lines.
Right.
What happens with a physiological tear that actually makes the healing process more hard and complicated, there's going to be more likelihood for keloid scarring, different things like this, is the fact that they're likely to still just go in and sew it equal, but the tear wasn't equal. And so if you can imagine the tear is like jagged like this and you just sew it equal or you try to follow it a bit, but it's really challenging. So in certain areas, it's going to be pulling on this line of tissue more and the next line of tissue less. Do you see how that would like it's harder to bring it together in a
Yeah.
good way?
Yeah.
And so that's why a lot of women these days, even with I've seen as far as fourth degree tears be healed naturally at home. Because if you heal through using different things. Like there's a specific type of seaweed, manuka honey. There's different things that women are using these days to
Amniotic sac.
naturally, right, amniotic sac, to naturally heal physiological tears. Because if you rest, you aren't moving that tissue, the body will naturally bring that
Hmm.
tear together
Hmm.
in a more organic way. There won't
Hmm.
be that same pulling on the fascia and all of this stuff and potentiality for
Hmm.
keloid scarring, because basically you're kind of bunching in some areas. You're going to be bunching the tissue. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Along that site.
Hmm.
So that's, yeah, so that's why actually like there can be benefit to choosing to heal quite severe tearing
Yeah,
sovereignly at home, is because there's going to be less
right,
chance of unideal scar tissue forming.
right. And doctors aren't trained in that. They don't know that. They understand episiotomies, they understand stitching, they understand sutures. That's what their training is. And bless them for knowing that, because that is really helpful. And not every woman is necessarily going to be able to heal sovereignly at home, right? We want to remember the nuances. So
Yeah, 100%.
that can be so beneficial and so great for a lot of women, for millions of women, billions of women. And there's still going to be women that that's not the case. You know, I had a tear
I
in my vagina that did not heal, and it was a physiological tear, and there ended up being sutures, and then the sutures, and so just there's a whole story there. I'm not going to get into every single detail, but yeah, it's understanding that doctors are intelligent, they have a lot of training, they're educated from a specific perspective,
exactly.
and that is beneficial, but it's also limited, you know, because
Exactly.
they're not trained in herbal protocols and all these other things. And I remember when I was leaving the hospital, I asked one of my doctors and I said, "Hey, what herbs can I take to," and I'm an herbalist. Like I was like, I know these things, but I'm now
Right.
traumatized and I can't think straight. And so I'm asking him, "Hey, like what herbs can I take to help my body heal? What can I do to help my body heal?" And he looked at me and took my hands and he said, "I don't know." And this is one of the OBGYNs. And he was like, "I'm not an herbalist. I would
Right.
encourage you to speak to herbalists, to speak to other natural practitioners, do whatever you can. But I can't inform you of anything. I can't tell you what I don't know,"
Right.
you know?
Exactly.
And that humility was also amazing. Amazing to hear and receive, you know?
Exactly. Right.
Hmm.
Right. It just makes you respect a person more, you know?
Yeah.
Like I would expect to be disrespected if I was walking around talking about surgical birth like I knew how to perform such a thing, you know? Like
Yeah.
there is a certain just wisdom to stay in the realm of what you know, you know?
Yeah.
And yeah,
Yeah.
beyond that, I would really like to just speak to the reality of what science is,
Mm.
and specifically highlight the reality that science is constantly proving itself wrong. It's constantly evolving,
Mhm.
right? And you know, in the same way that I oftentimes observe that a person's gift is also oftentimes their shadow, I would speak that same reality into the realm of science, and I would speak to that the beauty and the wisdom being the function of peer-reviewed research. And I would also say that the shadow and the limiting factor is the need to prove everything through research and peer-reviewed processing, especially when there is so much limitation around funding for such a process, right? And so I see people all of the time who really bow down to science of like, but the peer review process, it hasn't been peer reviewed yet. It hasn't gone through the final stage. It had, you know, and it's like, yes, okay, I can totally understand that perspective and that process of wanting to
Mhm.
wait for the peer reviewed whatever. But the shadow is also that exact thing, is the reality that we have to wait for it. that there isn't enough independent research happening. In the realm of birth, there are certain things that are close to impossible to get that, really critically critical reviewed studies, and not only like to have the proper variables in place. Like
Right. Can you give some examples?
how do we study something like what is the statistic of home births transferring to the hospital? Not only is that near impossible because we don't know how many people are birthing at home, we don't have that statistic. Beyond that, what we're seeing right now is an influx of families across the US and Canada who are actually choosing not to document their children,
Right.
which means they are choosing not to get a birth certificate for their child. And so it's a completely undocumented human.
It's a skewed statistic. And I remember people commenting on
100% of the
videos
time.
saying, with the statistics of free birth deaths and maternal deaths, infant mortality and transfers and all of these things, why would you choose free birth? And I said, there are no statistics on free birth. You can't have a statistic on data that you don't have. That doesn't
Right,
exist. You have
right,
data on the women that transfer, but only on the women that transfer. That's
right,
it.
right. Exactly. Yeah, so I'm actually in contact right now with a woman who has supported, she's a in my program, my midwifery program, and she's helped women or and multiple families go through this process of receiving passports, American passports for their undocumented children.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm really excited to potentially have a conversation with her about that in this space because it's something that a lot of families don't even know that they have as an option,
Mm-hmm.
that you can actually get a passport without a birth certificate, that your child does not have to be signed over
Yeah, interesting.
to the system. It's
I
a
would
very
love
interesting
to have a,
conversation.
yeah, I'd love to have a conversation with her here and talk about birth certificates as well. The pros and cons of having a birth certificate. I think that could be really
Interesting.
so good. So good.
Yeah.
Because it is. It's a conversation that I remember doing a lot of research on, or a topic I did a lot of research on in my pregnancy, and there wasn't a lot of data that I could find.
Right.
There wasn't a
Right. I've
lot
heard
of,
about it
yeah.
less in Canada. Like I know personally a few people that have gone through the process in the
Hmm.
States. I actually know people who have revoked their citizenship. So they have annulled their own birth certificates and their own to
Interesting.
become an independent citizen of
Yeah.
the world, basically. There's like a name for it that I don't know either, but I'm
Yeah, like
very curious about the
sovereign human or
topic. Yeah,
something. Yeah.
something like that. Yeah, but I would love to go deeper on the topic myself. Yeah,
Yeah,
but these
totally.
nuances, right? And so
Yeah.
it's like to bring it full circle to the point is there's so much limit
Yeah.
with the need to have peer-reviewed research as the
Right.
basis for truth
Right.
because we're missing a spectrum of possibility, right? And what you were speaking to in terms of these miracle healings,
Hmm.
that's happening every day, where
Hmm.
doctors are giving these very, very limiting reviews of somebody's life. Somebody like as extreme of like, I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do for you. You're going to die within the next year. And people are like, no, I'm not taking that. And they go out and find a cure and come back to their doctor, and their doctor's like, it's a miracle.
Hmm.
Well, it wasn't a miracle, it was possible.
Yeah.
You
Well,
just
and
did
then,
not
and
have the information to elicit that.
exactly. And when it comes to peer-reviewed studies, one of my questions is, what peers are reviewing this? What peers are you ostracizing and alienating from offering what they know and reading these studies before they're published? Are there people that have a different criteria, that have a lot of wisdom, a lot of experience, a lot of insight from a really unique or interesting perspective, birth keepers outside the system, whatever it might be, that have seen thousands, millions of births, but you're not willing to add this, peer to review your study, like there's also those subtleties, um, but I want to come back to this main point of informed consent.
Right.
And I want to speak to this woman named Anarcha Westcott. She is known as the mother of modern gynecology. She was born in the 1800s, and she received 30 surgeries to repair a very similar injury that I had sustained in childbirth. These surgeries that she received were done without the use of anesthesia. So she felt every cut that the surgeon performed. And the surgeon's name, the doctor's name, is Dr. Marion Sims. He's known as the father of modern gynecology. He's known and credited with developing the speculum. He spearheaded the knowledge that doctors still carry today to heal fistulas, fistula repair. And a fistula, for definition purposes, is an unnatural opening between various parts in the body. So you can have a fistula between the liver and the gallbladder. You can have a fistula between the different chambers in the heart. You can have a fistula. In this case, there's 3 different fistulas that can occur during childbirth. There might be more, but there's rectovaginal, there's vescovaginal, and there's another one. One of them is an opening between the bladder and the vaginal canal. One of them is between the urethra and the vaginal canal, and one of them is between the rectum and the vaginal canal. And this can create uh, bacteria overgrowth, sepsis, illness, death. That's the reason that a lot of women historically did die in childbirth, and why that occurred. And so in the 1850s, Dr. Marion Sims decided to try to figure this out. Further obstetrics to help people. And this is a touchy subject, right? Because he did experiment on women that were enslaved. 3 women, Anarcha Westcott, Betty, and Lucy. 3 women that I say their names every single day because they directly impacted my level of care. I'm sitting here today healthy because of their sacrifice, because of their suffering, and because of the things that Dr. Sims, Dr. James Marion Sims, learned throughout these horrific and barbaric experiments. And what we can learn from Anarcha Westcott is really this concept of informed consent. We have very limited information on who she was, on what she felt, on what her experience entailed, because she was an enslaved woman, because she was a woman, period, because it was the 1850s. And Dr. James Marion Sims' account was the only account that mattered at that time. These surgeries, though, what we do know is that she would be in a room with up to, I think, 10 to 15 other men holding her down while these surgeries were performed, as well as Lucy and Betsy. No anesthesia. I think there may have been a little bit of opiates distributed into her body somehow to help calm her, help with the pain, but that doesn't do a lot when you're having an operation. After a few surgeries, from my research, the fistulas that she had, one was a vescovaginal, one was a rectovaginal fistula, so she had 2. They were repaired, and then he continued to experiment on her body following that to further his education, to further this understanding. You can find this documentation all over the internet. You can find diagrams, all of these things. And when the men that were holding her down were tired, Dr. James Marion Sims would call on other enslaved men and women to hold her down while she screamed and had these surgeries performed on her. I would imagine, knowing the type of injuries she sustained, because she also had a 3-day long labor, she had a stillbirth, her baby was posterior. Like, she had such similar things, identical nearly things as I did. Because she received certain injuries, I would imagine, and this is full on projection because I don't know her, and this is a woman that I every day wish I could speak to, but I would imagine that she would want these things repaired. However, the depth of suffering that she would go into, and potentially not understanding what she was agreeing to, are really big factors in this conversation with informed consent. And if this is what obstetrics is built on, and I reflect and I use examples of like building a house. If your foundations are cracked and shaky and faulty. The house that you're building on will be cracked and shaky and faulty. The foundations of things do matter. And we are still able to evolve and shift. So just because a foundation of something is built on unhealthy or problematic barbaric principles doesn't mean there can't be healing and medicine and beauty and grace and light, right? It doesn't mean that we can't still approach obstetrics in a way that is heart-centered. But it is important to understand that these principles, that these teachings, that these things that Dr. Marion James Sims brought to obstetrics is still referred to. The ways that he practiced gynecology and his findings are still referenced in medical journals today.
Right. And he's the one that's highlighted, right? I think is the big piece there. You know, his findings, his research.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, and of course, every woman who has had a fistula repaired, I mean, most of them probably aren't aware of these two names and these two people that influenced that. But I'm sure they're grateful for the repair, right? For the care.
Yeah.
And yet, what you're highlighting is something that's so important as we step into this really big prayer and intention
Mm-hmm.
to broaden our perspective and our relationship with birth, with everything that is involved, everything that falls under that umbrella, you know, creating intentional space to bring all of that forward. There is going to be endless layers of nuance and paradox that we come up against, that we are invited to interface with, reflect upon, and integrate into our consciousness. And what that process will really elicit is a deeper, wider spectrum of awareness and true depth of understanding. And we need to speak the names of Anarcha Westcott, Betsy, and Lucy. We need to bring them into this conversation. And there are a lot of names that I know that I'm not aware of right now. You know, there's a lot of other women and mothers that I know who have gone through things that have informed the care models that now exist, for better or worse. But I want to learn those things. I want to know more. I want to know these stories. I want to interact with them. I want to be able to send a prayer of gratitude to the women who suffered so that other women didn't have to, not in the
Right.
same way, at least.
Right.
Right?
Well, and if we're understanding as well that this doctor, Dr. James Marion Sims, was looking at these women as guinea pigs, as things to practice on. And by the way, I will add that after doing these surgeries on these enslaved women in, I don't remember the location, it was in the United States somewhere, and he felt comfortable enough to perform these surgeries, he offered these surgeries to white women with anesthesia.
Right.
And so if we are still referencing these findings and these teachings from the 1850s, where this man spoke of these women as objects to be repaired and experimental tools and things to further knowledge and education, if that's what we're referencing when it comes to healing fistula repair, and we're not taking into account a woman's psychology, other things, other ways that she's going to show up and do for her body, how do we know that I can't birth vaginally?
Right.
If our findings are only rooted, or mostly rooted at least, in the teachings of this man that lived 200 years ago that viewed the female body as a thing, not a living, breathing organism that has the ability to change and evolve and feel pain. Like, I just, there's so many layers here, and we're just touching the surface,
Literally, right. And so,
But
yeah, I would love to invite this conversation forward,
hmm
and really continue to weave with curiosity as the foundation, this
hmm
conversation of informed consent. And yeah, explore together, you and I, every guest that comes on to speak and every listener. Like let's learn together. Let's grow together. Let's
yeah,
deepen our own capacities to activate informed consent for ourselves and for others. Right? Let's go deeper. Let's explore deeper. Let's be curious. Let's ask the questions. Let's normalize that process. From the prayer, that process can activate higher levels and qualities of care for everyone.
yeah, yeah. Because and without attachment to outcome, because there's no guarantees in anything. There's
Right.
not one guarantee. And I remember, as I realized, or as I was informed that I wouldn't be able to birth vaginally, I said, okay, if I'm going to have a cesarean, how am I going to do this with intention? How am I going to do this with sacredness, with prayer? And I started thinking of, like, okay, even if it is a scheduled cesarean, I can bring people together on that day. We can pray together. They can hold a prayer circle as I go in. I can, ask somebody to cleanse me with some sacred herbs and the smoke. And there's so many things that can still be done,
Right.
And I remember,
You can request the delayed cord clamping. You can request
yeah,
immediate skin to skin. You can request that the baby's not bathed, that the baby's
yeah,
not given certain things that you may or may not want the baby to
exactly.
receive, that the focus is not how much the baby weighs and how long it is, that the
Yeah.
focus is that it's on your chest,
hmm
for that
Yeah,
3 hour golden hour period. Like, what things can you request from your care team that could mimic a more physiological birth?
exactly. And it's not even what we do or the specifics of what we do that makes something sacred or beautiful. It's the spirit in which we do them. And that
Exactly.
we do have some control over, we do have influence over. So no
Right.
matter what your
Exactly.
birth choices are, if you don't do delayed cord clamping, or you do, or whatever it is that you might want, we can still choose to show up with prayer. And we can still choose to have
Exactly.
those conversations with our doctors. And it might not change an outcome, and that's okay. Because what
Right.
changes is us and them being in that space of conversation, being in that space of openness and sacred curiosity.
Beautiful. Yes.
Yes.
So much yes.
Okay, so we'll see you. I guess we can bring that together, and we'll see you guys in the next one.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being a part of these conversations. It means the world to us.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And aho.
Have a blessed day.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.